They will build you a throne of adoration, call you a savior, and sing your praises in the streets. But that love is the kindling for your own funeral pyre. The same hands that lift you up will be the first to light the match. The question is not if they will betray you, but how you will survive when they do. This is the great seductive lie whispered into the ear of every aspiring leader, that to be powerful is to be loved. This is the idealist's design, the blueprint for a castle built in the clouds. He is the architect who draws his plans based on hope, who believes the best of his materials. He sees humanity not as it is, but as it ought to be. He governs with an open hand, offering clemency, generosity, and trust, believing these to be the currency of loyalty. His every decree is designed to elicit applause, his every action calculated to win affection. He avoids the hard, necessary decisions that might displease the crowd, for he is a prisoner to their goodwill. He builds his state upon the flimsy foundations of gratitude and the shifting sands of public opinion. His walls are made of promises, his towers are built from praise, and his mortar is the naive belief that men will return good for good. In a perfect world, his castle would touch the heavens, but we do not live in a perfect world. We live in this one. And in this world, the idealist's design is a blueprint for spectacular collapse. Machiavelli understood this with a clarity that chills the bone. He knew that the materials the architect of power must work with are flawed from the quarry. He wrote that men are ungrateful, fickle, liars and deceivers, fearful of danger and greedy for gain. As long as you succeed for them, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, their property, their lives and their children when the need is distant. But when the storm of fortuna arrives, when hardship knocks at the gate, their love reveals itself for what it truly is, a luxury, a sentiment. It is a bond of obligation that, because men are inherently self-interested, is broken at every opportunity for their own advantage. The people you fed will complain of hunger. The soldiers you spared will join the ranks of your enemy. The nobles you enriched will plot your downfall in the very halls you gave them. The idealist, standing on his balcony and expecting loyalty, finds himself facing a mob. His beautiful castle, built on the illusion of affection, dissolves in the first downpour of reality. His mistake was not in his intentions, which may have been noble, but in his foundation, which was fatally weak. He tried to build a monument to how men should behave, and was destroyed by how they do. There is, however, another way, the way of the prince, the way of the master builder who does not begin with a fantastical drawing, but with a cold, hard survey of the terrain. This architect understands the nature of his materials. He knows the stone is brittle, the wood is warped, and the ground itself is unstable. Therefore, he does not seek to build with the ethereal substance of love. He seeks his foundation in granite. He builds his fortress on reality. The prince understands a fundamental truth of political physics. That which you do not control is a liability. You cannot control the affections of others. Their love is a gift, given and taken away on a whim. But you can, and you must, control their perception of consequence. You must be the master of their calculations. This is the true meaning of being feared. This fear is not the vulgar terror of a mindless brute. It is not arbitrary cruelty or wanton violence, for that is the path to being hated, a fatal error we will dissect later. No, the fear a prince cultivates is something more profound. It is a form of awe. It is the deep, unshakable, and silent understanding among all, from the lowest commoner to the highest baron, that the structure of the state is absolute. It is the recognition that the prince's will is the law, and that to act against it is to invite certain and decisive ruin. It is the fear of the consequences of breaking the order that the prince alone guarantees. This fear is a buttress, reinforcing the walls of the state. It is a moat, deep and wide, protecting the realm from the chaos of conspiracy and rebellion. While the idealist's power vanishes with his popularity, the prince's power resides in the very architecture of the reality he has constructed. His subjects may not love him in their hearts, but they obey him with their hands, because they understand that the security he provides is infinitely more valuable than the affection he withholds. They fear his punishment, yes, but more than that, they come to fear a world without him. They fear the return of the chaos he subdued. His fortress stands not because it is beautiful, but because it is strong. It is a testament to the undeniable power of seeing the world as it is and building a foundation on the one material that never fails. For he who builds on the people builds on mud. The prince, however, lays his foundation on what he can control, not the love of others but the fear he himself imposes. Comment: order over chaos. If you understand that lasting power is a work of engineering, not of chance, and subscribe to learn how to raise your walls. The prince who understands that fear is the true bedrock of his fortress cannot merely wish it into existence. He must possess the tools to forge it, to sculpt the unpredictable forces of the world into the enduring shape of his will. He must be more than a dreamer. He must be a craftsman, a sculptor of the state itself. Two fundamental instruments stand paramount in his arsenal, defining the very essence of his capacity to rule, his virtu and the impregnable walls of his own making. First, consider the unparalleled utility of virtu. Not virtue as the common man understands it, a mere collection of moral excellencies, but virtu as the precise square and compass in the hands of the master architect. It is the raw, unflinching competence, the strategic genius, the audacious will that recognizes the turbulent currents of fortuna, fate, luck, circumstance, and bends them to its design. Fortuna delivers the raw, uncarved stone from the quarry. A looming external threat, a sudden internal crisis, an unforeseen opportunity, a treacherous plot from within. The idealist gazes at these materials with either paralyzed despair or naive optimism, hoping they will magically assemble themselves. The man of virtu, however, does not wait for destiny to unfold. He seizes the chisel and hammer. He measures the angles of danger, calculates the stress points of opportunity, and with a ruthless, almost surgical precision, he shapes the chaos into coherence. Virtu is the unyielding resolve to act, even when the deed is unpalatable. It is the ability to discern the true nature of men and events, stripping away sentiment and illusion, to see only the strategic imperative. It manifests as swift, decisive action in moments of peril, confounding enemies and solidifying the faith of hesitant allies. When a rival faction threatens, virtu dictates the timing of its dismantling, ensuring it is done so completely that no root remains to sprout further rebellion. When a crisis of resources looms, virtu devises innovative, even harsh fiscal measures that, while painful initially, guarantee the long-term solvency of the domain. It is the audacity to take calculated risks that yield disproportionate gains, to strike with the swiftness of a thunderbolt, impressing upon all observers that the prince is not a man to be trifled with. This profound display of practical acumen, this consistent triumph over adversity born of sheer ability, is what instills true respect, and thus true fear. It is not the fear of wanton cruelty, but the fear of inevitable, overwhelming consequence that arises from challenging a force of such demonstrable competence. Observing such a prince, one learns to dread not his malice but his capacity, his sheer strategic superiority, which makes any opposition seem utterly futile. To contend with a man of virtu is to fight against gravity. It is to challenge the very laws of the political universe he has masterfully orchestrated. This formidable capability, this virtu, inherently guards against the insidious creep of contempt. For contempt is the precursor to hatred, born from the perception of weakness, indecision, or incompetence. A prince whose actions are marked by virtu appears unassailable, a force of nature whose decisions, however severe, are understood as necessary for the grand design. He does not vacillate. He does not apologize for strength. His hand is steady, his eye keen, and his judgment final. This unwavering posture broadcasts a silent yet potent message to all subjects and rivals. I am fully capable of securing my domain and exacting a price for any challenge. This message, delivered consistently through action rather than mere words, carves the foundation of a fear that is not only robust, but also devoid of the bitterness that fuels rebellion. The second indispensable tool for the master builder is the construction of his own principal wall, the unwavering strength of his private army. Machiavelli's most strident counsel warns against the fatal folly of relying on mercenaries or auxiliary forces. These are armies whose loyalty is transactional, whose courage is fleeting, and whose allegiances lie not with the prince, but with their own shifting fortunes. They are unreliable materials, prone to crumbling under pressure or worse, turning against the very structure they were hired to defend. For the prince, relying on such external powers, be they foreign troops, powerful but independent noble factions, or even the fickle goodwill of an untrained populace, is akin to building his fortress walls from rented scaffolding. It offers a temporary illusion of strength, but ultimately leaves him vulnerable and dependent. The private army is more than a literal military force. It is a profound metaphor for self-reliance in all its forms. It represents the absolute control the prince must exert over the critical elements of his power. This means cultivating loyal, capable administrators and advisors whose fortunes are inextricably linked to his own. It means establishing independent financial resources, not reliant on the unpredictable generosity of others. It means fostering a coherent, unified chain of command where intelligence flows directly and orders are executed without question. It signifies the development of a personal, unshakable resolve that needs no external validation or support. When a prince's decisions are informed by his own intelligence networks, executed by his own trusted agents, and financed by his own treasury, his power is inherent, not borrowed. It emanates from the core of his being, from the very heart of his dominion. This self-sufficiency is the ultimate deterrent against contempt and consequently hatred. A prince who depends on others for his security appears weak, beholden, and ultimately disposable. His authority is diluted, his decisions compromised by the need to placate his benefactors. Such dependence breeds an insidious contempt among his subjects who witness his inability to stand alone. They begin to whisper of his vulnerabilities, of cracks in his armor, and these whispers eventually grow into shouts of defiance. But the prince who commands his own army, in every sense of the word, projects an image of unassailable autonomy. His strength is innate, his decisions are his own. He needs no one's permission to defend his realm, to execute justice, or to assert his will. This undeniable independence inspires a deep-seated respect, a recognition that he is truly sovereign. His power is not a fleeting favor, but a permanent feature of the landscape. It is the granite wall, so robust that few would dare to test its strength, knowing that behind it stands a builder whose virtue ensures its absolute, unyielding defense. The sheer presence of this self-generated power is enough to inspire the necessary fear, keeping both internal and external threats at bay, without resorting to the excessive cruelties that, while perhaps born of necessity, too often become the breeding ground for that most dangerous of emotions, profound and active hatred. This is the careful balance, to demonstrate an overwhelming capacity for action through virtue and an impregnable foundation of self-reliance, thereby instilling a fear that safeguards, rather than destabilizes, the meticulously constructed edifice of power. The fortress of the prince now stands, its foundations secured by virtue, its walls fortified by a power entirely his own. But a fortress, however strong, is still an object of potential siege. It is an imposing, even menacing structure in the landscape of human affairs. The master builder understands that the final, most crucial phase of his work is not in strengthening the stone, but in managing the perception of it. He knows that the populace will never comprehend the intricate engineering of the deep foundations, nor will they appreciate the cold, hard logic of the steel framework within the walls. They will only ever see the exterior. They will judge the entire edifice by its facade. Therefore, the prince must become both architect and theatrical director, staging a magnificent public performance designed to soothe, to inspire, and to obscure the necessary but often brutal mechanics of his rule. This is the grand theater of power, where appearance is not a deception, but a paramount strategic tool. Machiavelli illuminates this with piercing insight. For men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands. Everyone can see what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. The masses are an audience, seated at a distance, unable to touch the reality of governance. They form their judgments based on the spectacle you present. The wise sovereign, therefore, meticulously ornaments the austere facade of his power with the 5 great virtues that men profess to admire. He must cultivate the public image of being merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and above all, religious. These qualities are the polished marble, the gilded frescoes, the soaring spires that draw the eye upward and inspire a sense of security and righteousness. When the prince dispenses a public pardon, he must appear to do so from a place of profound mercy, not from a cold calculation of popular opinion. When he honors an agreement, it must be seen as a testament to his unwavering faith, not as a temporary convenience. Every public act, every word spoken from the balcony, must be a brushstroke in the masterpiece of his own reputation. This performance is not for the prince's own vanity, it is a critical component of statecraft. This carefully maintained facade serves as a powerful shield, deflecting the resentment that raw, undisguised power naturally generates. It is the anesthetic that makes the necessary surgery of the state bearable for the patient. The populace, comforted by the appearance of a just and pious ruler, is far less likely to question the harsh necessities that occur behind the curtain. And yet, herein lies the profound and difficult duality of the prince's mind. He must be a master of this outward appearance, but he must never become its slave. He must have a mind, as Machiavelli wrote, so conditioned that he can change to the contrary as the winds of fortune and the variations of affairs dictate. While his hands are busy performing acts of public clemency, his mind must be calculating the precise moment for a decisive and ruthless strike. The internal structure of his character must be forged from the cold steel of pragmatism, allowing him to be whatever the security of his state requires him to be in any given moment. To seem merciful while being prepared to be cruel, to seem faithful while knowing when a promise must be broken for a greater strategic gain. This is the terrible, lonely genius of the master builder, to create a beautiful and reassuring exterior that conceals an interior designed for the sole purpose of survival and the preservation of order. With this understanding, we see that the most significant threats to the prince's rule are not armies at the gate, but failures in this architectural balancing act. 2 specific forms of structural decay must be avoided at all costs, for they can bring the entire edifice crashing down: the corrosive acid of hatred and the slow dissolution of contempt. They are not the same, and the prince must be a master diagnostician of both. Hatred is the most dangerous threat, for it is an active and intensely personal force. It is a slow-acting poison that turns a subject into a patient assassin, an obedient functionary into a secret conspirator. Hatred is not born from stern justice or necessary acts of severity. The populace can understand and even respect a leader who is firm. Instead, Machiavelli identifies its 2 primary sources with chilling precision: the seizure of property and the violation of the honor of women. These are the 2 sacred pillars of a man's private world. All other injuries are negotiable or transient, but these strike at the core of his identity, his lineage, and his legacy. As the Florentine noted, a man forgets the death of his father more quickly than the loss of his patrimony. To take a man's land or his inheritance is to erase his past and his future. To dishonor the women of his house is to defile his present and his name. These are violations that implant a blood debt in the heart, a desire for vengeance that will smolder for years, awaiting only the slightest spark of opportunity to erupt into a conflagration. The master builder must therefore treat the property and the families of his subjects as sacrosanct. His hands can be covered in the blood of his enemies on the battlefield, but they must be scrupulously clean of the possessions of his own people. This is the inviolable rule for preventing the corrosive spread of hatred. Contempt, on the other hand, is a more subtle yet equally fatal form of structural decay. It is not an active fire, but a quiet rot. It is the slow turning of the state's mortar into dust. Contempt is born when the prince is perceived as variable, frivolous, effeminate, pusillanimous, or irresolute. When his decisions are erratic and his word is unreliable, he is seen as variable. When he concerns himself with trivialities instead of the grave matters of state, he is seen as frivolous. When his bearing lacks gravitas and command, he is seen as effeminate. When he shrinks from necessary risks, he he is seen as pusillanimous, and when he is unable to commit to a course of action, he is seen as irresolute. Such a ruler is not feared, nor is he truly hated. He is simply dismissed. His authority dissolves. His commands are met with quiet non-compliance, his laws with passive resistance. The great stones of the state are no longer held together by a binding force. People cease to believe in the integrity of the structure because they have lost all respect for the architect. The fear he once commanded evaporates, replaced by ridicule, and a prince who is an object of ridicule is already a ghost upon his own throne. Therefore, every action must be imbued with a sense of gravity and finality. His judgments must be irrevocable. His posture must be one of unshakable confidence. He must project an aura of such profound seriousness that to trifle with him would be unthinkable. This is how he builds a bulwark against contempt, ensuring his authority remains solid and binding. Here then is the masterful synthesis. The prince must navigate the narrow channel between these two abysses. He inspires fear through his unwavering resolve, his decisive action, and his formidable capacity, the very qualities that ward off contempt. Simultaneously, he avoids hatred by placing an iron cordon around the private lives and properties of his subjects. His public persona is a performance of the highest virtues, a magnificent facade that reassures and pacifies, while his inner resolve remains ruthlessly pragmatic, ready to do what is necessary. He is the complete architect, who understands that the strongest fortress is not merely one with impenetrable walls, but one whose appearance inspires admiration, while its reputation inspires a profound and calculated fear. You have learned the blueprints of human nature. You have mastered the tools of strategic competence, and you have designed the magnificent facade that conceals the unyielding structure of your power. Now, before we lay the cornerstone that consecrates this edifice for all time, ensure you are subscribed. The final dedication of a great and terrible work is witnessed only by its most devoted patrons, those who understand that true power is not seized, but built. The moment of ultimate transition has arrived. This is the point where the architect ceases to be a mere builder and becomes a founder. It is the masterstroke, the singular, decisive action that transforms a precarious structure into a permanent monument. This is not an act of passion or revenge, but a cold, deliberate, and foundational act of political creation. It is the supreme expression of virtù seizing a fleeting opportunity granted by fortuna. Machiavelli provides the brutal but essential theorem: men must be either caressed or annihilated, for they will avenge slight injuries, but from catastrophic ones they cannot. Half measures are the refuge of the irresolute ruler, and they are the seeds of his own destruction. To wound an enemy and allow him to survive is to cultivate a future nemesis who now possesses both a grievance and a lesson. It is to leave a venomous serpent crippled but not dead in your own garden. The prince who understands the architecture of power does not commit such a novice error. He knows that certain threats cannot be managed, they must be eliminated. Consider the challenge of a newly acquired state, where the lineage of the former ruler still exists. His sons, his brothers, his cousins, they are not merely men, they are living symbols of an alternative order. Their very existence is a silent rebellion, a rallying point for all who are discontented with the new regime. To imprison them is to make them martyrs. To exile them is to create a rival court abroad. To attempt to placate them with titles and gold is to fund their inevitable conspiracy. The idealist would seek reconciliation. The fool would seek to ignore them. The master builder, however, knows that to secure his new foundation, he must clear the ground completely. The act is terrible, but the logic is irrefutable. The entire line of the old blood must be extinguished. It must be done in a single, swift and silent operation, a night of surgical violence that is over before the sun rises. This is not a massacre for public display. It is a clinical, structural necessity performed in the shadows. He does not hack at the branches of the old tree. With one decisive stroke, he removes the root. This is the economy of cruelty in its most profound application. It is the principle that injuries should be inflicted all at once so that, being tasted less, they offend less. The shock of the act is immense, but it is finite. It is a terrifying thunderclap, that echoes once and then is followed by a new and lasting silence. The populace is stunned, awed, and deeply fearful. They have witnessed the prince's ultimate capacity. They now understand, without any room for doubt, that his will is absolute and his reach is final. But because the violence was specific, directed at a clear political threat and not at the people themselves, it does not fester into widespread hatred. The terrible deed is done, and it is over. The wound is cauterized by its own heat. From this act of supreme violence, a new order can now be born, and here begins the second, and arguably more important, phase of the masterstroke, the immediate consolidation. The true test of a prince is not in his ability to destroy, but in his capacity to create in the wake of that destruction. Having laid the cornerstone in blood and fear, he does not rest. He does not indulge in the paranoia of a tyrant who continues to see ghosts in every shadow. Instead, the prince immediately sheathes his sword and picks up the trowel. His work of demolition is finished. His work of establishing the new reality begins at dawn. He immediately introduces new laws and new institutions. He reorganizes the administration, promotes new men whose loyalty is to him alone, and establishes customs that reinforce his rule. He becomes a patron of the arts and commerce, guaranteeing the security of property and trade routes. He ensures that justice, while severe, is predictable and consistent. This is the great turning point where the nature of his power transforms. The structure he has built ceases to be an alien imposition and begins to become the very landscape of daily life. The people, having witnessed the terrifying consequence of opposing him, now begin to experience the tangible benefits of his order. The fear of his person gradually recedes into the background, replaced by a more profound and useful fear, the fear of losing the stability he has created. They forget the brutal process of the fortress's construction and come to cherish the safety of its walls. The memory of the foundational violence serves not as a source of hatred, but as the ultimate guarantee of the new peace. The sovereign's authority is no longer maintained by the constant threat of the executioner's axe, but by the institutions he has built, the prosperity he has fostered, and the chaos he holds at bay. The architect's power becomes embedded in the very architecture itself. He has created a new system, and now the system runs itself, perpetuating his legacy. This is the philosophical destination of the Machiavellian journey. The ultimate power is not personal, it is structural. It is the creation of a stato, a state, a condition, a lasting order that can withstand the storms of fortuna long after its founder is gone. The love of the people is as fleeting as a summer breeze. The fear of a single man dies with him. But an established order, a set of institutions and customs that provide security and a predictable way of life, can endure for generations. The fear, the deception, the calculated cruelties, these were never the ends in themselves. They were merely the necessary terrible tools of construction, the scaffolding around the rising edifice. Once the structure is complete and can stand on its own, the scaffolding can be dismantled. The master builder's ultimate triumph is to become, in a sense, redundant. His creation now speaks for him. Thus, the final distinction becomes clear. The tyrant imposes his will day after day through brute force, creating a state of perpetual fear that inevitably breeds a hatred that will consume him. His rule is a reign of terror. The prince, however, uses a singular foundational act of terror to end all chaos and inaugurate an era of order. His rule becomes a reign of law. One is an arsonist who enjoys the blaze, the other is a blacksmith who uses the fire to forge a new and durable instrument. The supreme power, then, is not the ability to command obedience through fear of one's person, but the ability to architect a reality in which obedience becomes the logical, self-interested choice for all. A tyrant rules a population, a prince builds a civilization, and that is the final unassailable measure of his power, not the throne he occupies, but the world he leaves behind, a world built to last.